Bonjour à tous. Hello. This press conference regarding the situation in Ukraine is being held in the Sir John A. Macdonald building in Ottawa on Friday, February 25th. I'm the moderator, Greg Quinn with Market News International. Avec nous aujourd'hui le Premier ministre Justin Trudeau, la ministre des Affaires étrangères Melanie Joly, also with us Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland, Minister of Defense Anita Anand, Minister of Immigration Sean Fraser, and Minister of International Development Harjit Sajjan. For those who are dialing in, I remind everyone to stick to best practices to minimize outside noise. We should have something like 10 minutes for questions with the Prime Minister and perhaps another 10 with the other ministers after that. That housekeeping done, let's begin with opening remarks from Mr. Trudeau. Prime Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Bonjour tout le monde. Good afternoon. Welcome to the 5th daily press conference of this week with me. I'm joined here today by Minister Joly and virtually by Deputy Prime Minister Freeland and Ministers Anand, Fraser, Sajjan to announce further measures in response to the tragedy in Ukraine. The world is witnessing the horrors of President Putin's war of choice. This is a brutal, needless attack on a sovereign, democratic country. It is an atrocity for Ukraine's over 40 million innocent citizens and for the world. Le mépris du président Poutine pour la liberté, la démocratie, le droit international et la vie humaine doit avoir des conséquences. Plus tôt aujourd'hui, j'ai eu une rencontre avec nos alliés de l'OTAN. J'ai aussi eu un appel avec le Premier ministre britannique Boris Johnson pour parler de nos actions concertées en réponse à la situation qui se détériore rapidement. Comme on l'a fait clairement savoir, le Canada, avec ses alliés et ses partenaires, est prêt à intensifier sa réponse et à imposer des conséquences encore plus lourdes au président Poutine et à ceux qui l'aident. Today, Canada is announcing our third set of severe, coordinated sanctions. First, we will be imposing sanctions on President Putin and his fellow architects of this barbaric war, his Chief of Staff and Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. These men bear the greatest responsibility for the death and destruction occurring in Ukraine. Additionally, I am confirming Canada's support to remove Russia from the SWIFT payment system, a critical part of the global banking system. We've made it clear that all options are on the table when it comes to imposing steep costs on Russia's unjustified and unprovoked invasion, and that includes taking steps to exclude Russia from making financial transactions around the world. Excluding Russian banks from SWIFT would make it even more difficult for President Putin to finance his brutalities. Canada is also announcing that we will levy additional sanctions on Belarus and its leaders for abetting President Putin's invasion of a free and sovereign nation. These will target 57 individuals and are in addition to the dozens of existing strong sanctions already leveled against Alexander Lukashenko's regime for their repeated, systematic human rights violations and decades of oppression of their own people. Aujourd'hui, le Canada annonce une troisième série de sanctions concertées. Ces sanctions visent le président Poutine, son chef de cabinet, ainsi que son ministre des Affaires étrangères, Sergei Lavrov. Elles visent aussi le régime du Bélarus, qui a facilité cette invasion. De plus, on annonce également que le Canada appuie fortement le retrait de la Russie du réseau bancaire SWIFT. Le coût humain de cette crise est énorme. Le monde est témoin des scènes tragiques de bombardements et de déplacements massifs. Le président Poutine provoque une crise de réfugiés en Europe. Je sais qu'il est dans la nature des Canadiens de vouloir aider. Les Canadiens sont toujours prêts à faire leur part et à être généreux pour les gens les plus vulnérables. Alors aujourd'hui, on annonce que notre gouvernement va donner une somme équivalente pour chaque dollar donné à la Croix-Rouge canadienne en réponse à la crise humanitaire en Ukraine, jusqu'à concurrence de 10 millions de dollars. Today, we are announcing that our government will match every donation you make to the Canadian Red Cross Ukraine Humanitarian Crisis Appeal, up to $10 million. This money will go directly to supporting relief efforts in the region. This is in addition to the $50 million for development humanitarian aid previously announced and the $620 million in sovereign loans we have made available to Ukraine's government. On a more personal note, let me just say that I've had the pleasure of getting to know Vladimir Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, quite well over the past number of years. Like I told him when we spoke yesterday, I am inspired by his resolve and his devotion to his country. He is the embodiment of the courage of Ukrainian people, and just like him, Ukrainian people are showing incredible strength and resilience. President Putin's war on Ukraine is a war on freedom, on democracy, and on the rights of Ukrainians and all people to determine their own future. President Putin has opened the darkest chapter yet in his assault on the Ukrainian people, but he has made a grave miscalculation. People around the world, including in the streets of Moscow and St. Petersburg, are standing against his brutal and unnecessary war. They are standing with Ukraine, as are all of us. Canada, and increasingly the world, stand united and unwavering in our support of Ukraine. Merci.
Thank you, Prime Minister. We'll turn to questions now. I'm hopeful to get two in the room and at least one on the phone, and we'll start with Madeleine Blais-Morin, Radio-Canada, et then, I believe, Rachel Haynes, CTV. Madeleine.
Monsieur Trudeau, le premier ministre Ford a dit qu'il fallait accélérer l'accueil de réfugiés en disant qu'il y aurait au moins 20 000 emplois disponibles pour eux. Le gouvernement Legault a dit qu'il était prêt à ouvrir ses bras aussi aux réfugiés. Avez-vous une cible chiffrée d'accueil de réfugiés ukrainiens et un plan pour l'atteindre?
Ça fait plusieurs semaines que malheureusement on se prépare pour cette éventualité qu'on espérait ne jamais arriver, mais ça faisait partie de ces préparations de s'assurer qu'on puisse accélérer le traitement de demandes de réfugiés, de demandes d'immigration, d'extension de visas pour les Ukrainiens couramment ici au Canada. Mais effectivement, on est prêt à en faire beaucoup plus. Et sur ça, je suis content de passer la parole à mon collègue, le ministre de l'Immigration, Sean Fraser, pour une réponse. Sean?
Thank you, and let me begin by adding my voice to the Prime Minister's remarks and condemning the egregious behavior of Vladimir Putin on this unnecessary war of aggression. The thought that someone would be so callous as to erode the self-determination of another sovereign nation and its people is beyond comprehension. As the Prime Minister said, we've been preparing for weeks. Since January 19th, we have been launching our operational readiness. We started by beefing up resources in our Warsaw, Vienna, Bucharest offices and preparing London for an influx of additional digital applications. We also on the same day started prioritizing applications that were already in our inventory and have so far had in excess of 2,000 applications approved from Ukrainians who had some sort of an application within IRCC. Just the other day, we launched a dedicated services channel, so Ukrainians who are seeking to take advantage of certain programs can reach us more quickly by phone, by web form, and use the, if you are using the web form, I would urge you to use the keywords Ukraine 2022, and your email will be prioritized. We've also launched new measures already for Ukrainians who are already in Canada that will make it easier for them to stay by extending their temporary status and issuing work permits to them so they can provide for themselves while they are here. We have taken nothing off the table for looking for additional solutions, as we will be looking to do the very Canadian thing of helping those in need, and in particular the people of Ukraine who have some of the strongest people-to-people ties of any country in the world. When I look at the fact that there are more than 1 million Ukrainians in Canada today, this is something that we should do. It's something that we will do.
Le Centre pour la sécurité du Canada presse les organismes à renforcer leur défense en ligne dans la foulée de l'attaque en Ukraine. Est-ce que vous faites un lien avec la panne des systèmes informatiques de l'aluminerie Alouette et est-ce que ça vous préoccupe?
On sait très bien depuis très longtemps que la Russie utilise des moyens de cyberattaque pour essayer de déstabiliser les démocraties à travers le monde. Le Canada est fortuné d'avoir des experts en cybersécurité égal à n'importe qui dans le monde. Nos centres de cybersécurité sont excellents et sont en train justement de travailler pour faire des suivis sur les attaques qu'on reçoit, mais aussi pour prévenir d'autres attaques. Je peux vous assurer que tout est en train d'être fait pour assurer la sécurité des Canadiens, physiquement bien sûr, mais aussi dans le monde virtuel et dans nos systèmes informatiques. On va continuer d'être vigilants pour assurer qu'on protège bien les Canadiens en ligne.
Hi, Prime Minister. Rachel Haynes from CTV National News. In your remarks, you spoke about being inspired by President Zelensky's courage and resolve. He has spoken about being on Vladimir Putin's hit list and is preparing for that as a possibility as Russian troops move in. Do you believe that the additional sanctions that you are announcing today will be enough to prevent that from happening?
The world has responded in an unprecedentedly united and coordinated way to respond to Vladimir Putin's grave mistake. He has underestimated the resolve and the ability of Western democracies to stand up to defend not just our friends, but our values, our principles, and indeed the unprecedented period of peace and stability that's lasted over 75 years because of the rules and systems we put in place following World War II. Putin has chosen to upend 75 years of peace by invading a peaceful, unprovocative neighbor, and we are responding strongly and in a united way. The courage that President Zelensky and indeed all Ukrainians are showing in standing up to defend their homelands, to demonstrate that Vladimir Putin is wrong in the choice that he made, is inspiring. And with the sanctions that we're bringing forward on Vladimir Putin personally today, not just Canada, but other countries around the world, we're demonstrating that Putin's own personal wealth and his wealth that is being cared for by others is at significant risk because of his terrible mistake.
And as a follow-up, in your remarks, you also mentioned trying to get Russia out of the SWIFT system in Europe. When you just answered me talking about a united and coordinated approach, but there are a number of European countries who aren't willing to take that step yet. So what is your message to those countries who have not shown that same interest in kicking Russia out of SWIFT?
Russia has demonstrated a callous disregard for the systems and indeed the peace that we have fought for and won over the past 75 years. Peace that led to, yes, unprecedented safety and security for citizens in Europe and indeed around the world, but also led to unprecedented prosperity and growth for people in Europe and around the world. He cannot expect to overturn and end 75 years of peace with a violent and unprovoked attack on an innocent neighbor and still expect to be able to benefit from the financial systems and economic opportunities that that very peace has created over the past 75 years. So Canada, the UK, and a number of other countries are being very clear that the SWIFT system should be removed from Russia, and those conversations are ongoing with our European allies who are reflecting on this very carefully, as you've said.
We'll turn to a question from the phone now. I believe we should have David Aiken, Global News. My apologies. It looks like Émilie Bergeron, La Presse Canadienne.
Oui, bonjour, désolée, j'avais de la misère avec mon micro. Monsieur Trudeau, pour revenir sur les nombreuses personnes qui tentent de fuir l'Ukraine en ce moment, vous avez annoncé des mesures hier pour faciliter leur arrivée. Or, quand même, avec ce qui s'est passé en Afghanistan, certaines personnes pourraient douter que ces mesures-là soient suffisantes, pourraient craindre qu'un scénario pareil à ce qui s'est passé en Afghanistan se reproduise dans ce cas-ci aussi. Qu'est-ce que vous leur dites pour les rassurer?
Tout d'abord, on a développé des outils pour aider les gens en Afghanistan et on peut d'ailleurs appliquer ces outils ici en Ukraine. Mais en même temps, il faut reconnaître que la situation est extrêmement différente. Il y a des pays alliés qui ont des frontières avec l'Ukraine et on a déjà pu installer des Canadiens et des alliés qui vont être là pour recevoir des gens qui sont en train de fuir avec des connexions ou une citoyenneté canadienne pour accélérer leur sortie. Mais on sait aussi que la grande majorité des gens qui quittent l'Ukraine présentement vont d'abord quitter pour d'autres pays en Europe parce que c'est là la proximité. Ils peuvent se rendre en voiture ou quasiment à pied à certains moments. Mais par la suite, dans les semaines et les mois à venir, il va y avoir des gens qui vont vouloir venir avec des familles, avec la communauté ukrainienne ici au Canada. Et comme le ministre Fraser l'a dit, on va avoir les outils pour pouvoir les aider.
Et il y a l'Association des avocats et des avocates en droit de l'immigration qui a regardé ce que vous avez annoncé hier en matière d'immigration et qui dit que ça, c'est pas suffisant, que ça répond pas à tous les problèmes que peuvent rencontrer les gens qui en ce moment tentent de fuir l'Ukraine, même s'ils peuvent passer, comme vous dites, par d'autres pays. Alors, êtes-vous prêt à déployer d'autres mesures en matière d'immigration? Êtes-vous en train de regarder ça? Qu'est-ce qui pourrait s'en venir à ce niveau-là?
Absolument. Comme le ministre Fraser a dit, et je le répète, on est ouvert à en faire plus, à pouvoir aider encore plus de monde. On est en train de suivre attentivement la situation. Comme vous savez, tout ça s'est passé extrêmement rapidement sur le terrain. Il y a beaucoup de gens qui avaient une détermination de rester en Ukraine parce qu'ils doutaient que la Russie allait réellement faire l'inimaginable et envahir. Et maintenant que la Russie a envahi, ils sont en train de sortir, mais ça va prendre un peu de temps pour voir qui va vouloir venir au Canada, qui va attendre dans un pays voisin pour espérer pouvoir retourner à leur vie, à leur maison dans les semaines à venir. Tout ça est sur la table. Nous sommes en train de s'ajuster, de travailler avec nos voisins, mais ce que les Canadiens peuvent savoir, et sans aucune surprise, c'est que nous allons être là pour aider ceux qui veulent fuir, qui veulent venir commencer une nouvelle vie au Canada. C'est quelque chose sur lequel nous sommes en train de miser pour notre avenir, pour l'avenir de tous les gens qui cherchent un meilleur avenir.
Thank you. I'm told we have one more question for the Prime Minister on the phone. Tonda McCharles, Toronto Star.
Thanks for taking my question. Prime Minister, the sanctions on Putin and his top aides there and Lavrov, can you talk about what actual impact you see this having? I mean, since no sanctions to date have deterred him in any way, do you have any reason to believe that he holds any assets, he or any of his circle hold any assets in Canada, that anything in a practical way will be affected?
First of all, Vladimir Putin has been in power in Russia for around 20 years, and regardless of the lack of respect for international norms and the behaviors in the past, including invading Crimea, we have not ever taken as a global community the step of sanctioning him personally. This is a significant step, and it has its impact in the fact that we are all as Western countries united and aligned on this. This goes directly at President Putin's considerable personal wealth. And you're absolutely right. He does not have much, if anything, in terms of personal holdings in Canada. But it's also going to be extremely important that we show a level of unity, a level of collaboration and firmness around the world, and prevent any loopholes from him trying to move money to places where he doesn't currently have money. It is an indication that Putin has made a terrible miscalculation in invading another sovereign country, because the response of the world has been firm, unequivocal, and directed at him and those who have enabled this wrong-headed and terrible decision to invade a neighboring country.
And as a follow-up, could you elaborate on your reasons perhaps for not taking some other steps, such as immediately either expelling any Russian diplomats from this country, or why you haven't immediately deployed the 3,400 that you've put on standby, given NATO's statement today?
First of all, as we've said, we continue to work closely with our allies on potential next steps, on things to do in the days and weeks to come. We recognize that this is unlikely to end quickly. We will need to be firm and resolved over possibly the long haul, and we are. But that's why putting things in place in the right order and the right sequence is extremely important. On NATO, I can tell you from the meeting we had this morning, allies are all resolved and resolute that we are there to protect Europe's eastern flank, to demonstrate that the alliance is strong and ready to respond were Putin to make the mistake of choosing to invade a NATO ally. And on top of that, that we are strong and united in our condemnation of their invasion of Ukraine. This is something we are going to continue to do, and part of that means being there to mobilize further forces to guard NATO's eastern flank, which Canada has, as most members have in NATO, put more troops at the disposal of NATO command to be able to demonstrate our resolve on this. On the issue of sanctions, I'm happy to turn it over to Minister Joly, who's been working extremely hard these past days and weeks to make sure that the sanction package is as strong as possible, as quick as possible, but also as seamlessly united amongst partners as it has been. Mélanie.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Thank you, Tonda, for your questions. So on question of sanctions, today is an important day because it follows everything that we've done over the entire week, which is sanctioning people that are involved in this conflict, that are decision makers, not only President Putin today, but also now the Foreign Minister, the Justice Minister, the Minister of Finance, and also the Minister of Defense of Russia are now sanctioned, not only by Canada, but by the entire West. President Lukashenko of Belarus had been already sanctioned last summer. Now we are also making sure that his guard around him are sanctioned. And why we're doing that? Because we want to make sure that we're suffocating the Russian regime. That's our goal. And we know that this has an impact in terms of their own decision making, but we know also that we need to work all together in a united West to make that happen. The Prime Minister mentioned definitely the fact of not having any form of loopholes. That's important, but also we're looking at different methods, including creative methods, to make sure that we are putting maximum pressure on Russia right now. On the question of Consular, I just wanted to, for Canada, it's important to have an ambassador right now in Russia. You heard the Prime Minister's speech. It is important for Russians to understand what is happening in Ukraine. The Deputy Prime Minister spoke in Russian yesterday, talked to the people in Russia, it is important that we reach out to them. 2,000 protesters were arrested by the Russian regime yesterday. It is important that the opposition within Russia is able to have access to facts. And my message also to Canadians that have families and friends in Russia, please tell them what you're seeing right now through our independent media. Please tell them what's happening in Ukraine. They need to know, and they need to talk to their friends and family. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe that should be all the time we have with the Prime Minister today. Thank you, Merci. We will turn to time with other ministers now, and I believe we have Mylène Clette, La Presse, and then I'll turn to the phone for Ashley Burke, CBC.
Bonjour. Ma question est pour Monsieur Fraser. I'm sorry, I don't know if you speak French or not. I'll ask it in English just in case. I'm wondering, are you considering lifting the visa requirements for Ukrainians who would like to come to Canada?
Merci pour la question. J'espère que vous êtes d'accord si je pose ma réponse en anglais aussi. Right now, we are looking at every option. We've considered a number of different angles that we can look at this, including by engaging members of the Ukrainian-Canadian community to examine what the right approach will be. I do want to reiterate, though, that there are significant measures that have already been put in place. And I just do want to address one of the questions that came up previously in respect to one of the challenges that we found compared to Afghanistan. And I want to credit Minister Joly, who's in the room with you there. One of the pinch points in Afghanistan involves very different facts where the Taliban have seized control and have prevented us from securing safe passage outside of the country for vulnerable people who are inside Afghanistan that we've made a commitment to. With the situation in Ukraine, to the west, Minister Joly has already secured agreements to secure the safe passage of Canadian citizens and permanent residents with Moldova, Slovakia, Poland, Romania, and Hungary. With respect to your question about visa requirements, there's different options that we are looking at, whether it's family reunification and sponsorship, whether it's different existing programs that we can make more flexible, or whether it's a refugee response or some combination thereof. But I do want to reiterate for those who may be eligible for the measures that we've already implemented, if you have an application in the inventory or make one now, it will be treated on a priority basis. If you are someone who is in Ukraine or in Canada from Ukraine now, we will be extending your temporary status and issuing you a work permit. We're going to have more to say on the different measures we're going to be implementing in the days and weeks ahead. And I would urge you to continue to look for reliable information through Government of Canada channels to understand exactly what shape these measures are going to take in the next few days.
And as for a target of the number of Ukrainians we could welcome here in Canada, I didn't hear you say one earlier when you were asked by my coworker.
Look, we haven't established yet an official target for the number. I think we're going to be looking at the circumstances as they continue to unfold. But I would remind folks, in addition to any special measures that we may be advancing in the near future, there are also existing measures that Ukrainians qualify for through Canada's ordinary immigration streams that will be processed in an expedited way. So I would urge those who have questions about Canada's immigration programs to use the web form, to use the dedicated service channel that we've established by email or by phone, so you can flag your interest in participating in some of these immigration programs, and we will have more to say this in the very near future.
Thank you. Now we turn to the phone, Ashley Burke, CBC.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. My question is for Minister Anand. You're activating 3,400 CAF members to be on standby for possible deployment to Europe as part of NATO's response force. When will they be deployed? Where will they be going? And what units specifically will be involved?
Okay, hi, Ashley. As a matter of usual course, we have certain troops that are on high readiness. What we've done in this case is implementing a reduced notice to move for these forces that could be deployed. These forces are on a menu of other items that we pledged to NATO, and NATO has not yet requested Canada to deploy those forces. So we stand ready to support NATO we stand ready to ensure that we are contributing to the deterrence and defensive posture of NATO. And in terms of these 3,400, that was part of the menu of items that Canada pledged to NATO, along with ships, aircraft, and other items. Let's be clear, though, that Canada already has over 500 Canadian troops in Latvia as part of Operation Reassurance. And this week, we increased the number of Canadian troops that can be deployed there to up to 460 soldiers. So our presence, leading the Enhanced Forward Presence Battle Group in Latvia, is extremely important. Canada is very well recognized as playing a leading role in protecting NATO's eastern flank, and we will continue to do our part. And our commitments to NATO are extremely important to us and will be respected whenever called upon. Thank you.
And how quickly, if you do get the go-ahead, could you deploy these 3,400 CAF members if NATO decides that's what they want? And as well, do you have 3,400 at the ready since there have been some staff shortages?
So part of what goes into the analysis of our pledges to NATO is ensuring that we have the capacity to deploy if called upon by NATO. So I was deeply engaged with the Chief of Defense Staff and the broader CAF personnel to ensure that we have the capacity to deploy if called upon. So the answer to your question is yes, we do. And in terms of the time periods within which they would be deployed if called upon by NATO to fulfill that pledge, that is something that I am discussing with the Chief of Defense Staff. But we, as I said, are on high readiness alert in case that call comes from NATO. Thank you, Ashley.
Thank you. Next up, I believe it's Lisa Marie Gervais, Le Devoir.
Hi, bonjour. My question is for Mr. Fraser. Can you tell me more about the delays? I mean, for someone who is in Ukraine for now, like people need to send papers or send their passport in order to get the visa. So the consular services are in Poland now. So how will the Ukrainian do this technically? And people from the Ukrainian community, lawyers, are afraid that it will take time. So what do you tell them? Like, will it be easy and quick?
Yes, and I say that not because I'm an optimist by nature, but because we've been preparing for more than a month now. As I mentioned during a previous answer, we started an internal task force within IRCC on January 19th to identify how we could boost our resources, originally in Ukraine at both our Kyiv and Lviv locations, but then by providing additional resources to Warsaw, Bucharest, and Vienna with some additional preparation in London. This included getting large volumes of the materials that we need to print travel documents and making sure that we're prepared to process and print them and deliver them in an urgent way. I do have confidence that we're prepared to deal with this more quickly than we have ever before. And because we've been preparing for a number of weeks, I feel that we're well equipped to deal with a potential influx of applications in a short period of time.
Lisa Marie, Sean, if I may, I spoke to our ambassador. J'ai eu l'occasion de parler à notre ambassadrice ce matin. L'équipe du Canada est en Pologne, mais tout près de la frontière ukrainienne. Présentement, les demandes de documents pour être en mesure d'avoir accès aux services de mon collègue Fraser en matière d'immigration sont disponibles en ligne, comme il l'a mentionné. Mais en même temps, l'équipe de l'ambassade ukrainienne, tout juste postée à l'extérieur de la frontière ukrainienne, est prête à être en mesure d'offrir certains documents dans des cas spécifiques. Maintenant, tout se passe vraiment beaucoup en ligne. Alors, ces cas-là sont vraiment très rares, mais nous avons aidé quelques personnes qui avaient besoin de documents papier dans des cas urgents.
This should be our last question, given our time. We have Mike Blanchfield, the Canadian Press.
Yeah, hello, Mike Blanchfield here, Canadian Press. For Minister Anand, Ukrainian parliamentarians, Ukrainian charge d'affaires in Ottawa, many others are begging Western air forces to impose a no-fly zone over Ukraine to protect its civilians from aerial bombardments. They're killing people, blowing up apartment blocks, hitting hospitals, other places. Can you discuss the calculation that has gone into by Canada and its NATO allies to not do this? Obviously, it's a delicate calculation because it could be seen as an act of war against Russia. But how do you balance that between that and desperate pleas from the ground in Ukraine to do something to free up their skies?
Sure, I will provide my response and then ask Melanie if she would like to also add something from a foreign affairs perspective. The reality is that NATO countries are bound by Article 5. And what Article 5 says is that an attack on one is an attack on all. And NATO countries will continue to maintain a defensive and deterrent posture in compliance with Article 5 and defend each other as members of the alliance. In terms of the no-fly zone or any other measure, we will continue to act in concert with our allies. And we need to recognize here that, first and foremost, Russia is the aggressor, and they are alone responsible for the aggression that has been levied on Ukraine. And what we have done as a NATO alliance across the board is to provide multifaceted support to Ukraine in order to protect its sovereignty and stability. From Canada's part, that has included over $700 million of aid, over $10 million of lethal and non-lethal aid, and a continued support in terms of sanctions, which will pinch Putin's pocket severely. In terms of the calculations relating to a no-fly zone from a foreign affairs perspective, I will turn the floor over to my colleague, Melanie Joly. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita. Well, you heard a great Canadian jurist talking about Article 5. So obviously, I agree with what Anita just said about our participation within NATO. We are in close contact with the Ukrainian government. The Prime Minister has been in contact with President Zelensky. I've been in contact also with the DPM of Ukraine, Minister of Finance and Minister of Foreign Affairs. And, you know, talking to different allies right now, many options are on the table. Like I mentioned earlier, our goal is to make sure that we end this further invasion of Ukraine. And we will have more things to say over the weekend. There will be a G7 Minister of Foreign Affairs meeting on Sunday. So based on that, we will obviously assess the situation, but continue to help Ukrainians through financial support, through lethal aid, like Anita just mentioned, and also making sure that we have a strong sanctions approach and that we create a very strong coalition of like-minded countries around the world to condemn what is happening in Ukraine. And we think that the fact that the world is seeing what is happening in Ukraine right now is convincing people from the world to take strong measures against Russia.
As a follow-up then, I mean, there are also warnings from within Ukraine that they believe that the Russian forces won't stop in their country. So how prepared is Canada and its NATO allies for Russian forces to cross the Ukraine border into Eastern Europe and into NATO territory?
I will start off again and simply say that, again, Article 5 is the governing principle that NATO countries are very well aware of and adhering to. The idea that it's an attack on a NATO country, whether it is the eastern flank of NATO or whether this is on the other side, Poland, for example, these are all NATO partners that are protected by Article 5. And again, an attack on one is an attack on all. And the purpose of, for example, Jens Stoltenberg saying today that NATO has activated parts of the VJTF is to enhance the deterrence that is already in place and contributed to by NATO countries. Deterrence is the principal focus of the way in which NATO countries are protected. And we have to make sure, as a participating country, that we are doing our bit, which we are. And we have to realize that any incursion by Russia into a NATO country will have severe consequences and will be subject to Article 5. And the idea that an attack on one is an attack on all. We are united as NATO countries on this very point. We are all signatories to Article 5 and the Washington Treaty, and Russia should well be aware of the importance of that article and the significance and consequences associated with it. Melanie?
Yeah, thanks, Anita. What you have seen this week is the fact that the EU, the UK, the US, and us have never been so united. Not only on the question of defense, and that is clear from the conversation that was held at NATO today between leaders, but at the same time, we're strong in our resolve to make sure that Putin and the people that took these decisions are condemned, and not only condemned, but that at the end of the day that there's enough opposition within Russia to put pressure on them. We think also that it is important that not only we be united, but that dealing with what is happening in Ukraine in a very strong manner will deter Putin from taking any further action or going ahead with any of other intentions he would have on affecting the sovereignty and territorial integrity of any other countries. So we know that this is a test, and we know that we have to step up to the plate. And that's exactly what we're doing right now.
Thank you, Ministers. Merci. That's all the time we have for questions today. So unless there are any other words you'd like to share in closing, thank you. Merci, Miigwech.
Merci.
Thank you.